What's the word, folks? Today's subject is a topic within the confines of zoology and ethology that has sort of intrigued me for quite some time. We are routinely told that humans are the only species on Earth capable of perpetrating acts of evil and moral wrongdoing with an almost pharisaic vigor. This is because, unlike animals, humans were born with an inherent moral consciousness and degree of intelligence that starkly contrasts our species with those which do not, who also inherit this Earth. With these anthropological and introspective revelations about our species' capacity of evil, it isn't uncommon for many people to carry a baleful, cynical, anti-natalist, and even anti-humanist attitude towards our own species for the acts of atrocities we have committed towards our own species, the planet, and millions of flora and fauna that populate this Earth. With a long and detailed history of acts of atrocities ranging from deforestation, animal culling, which has led to overpopulation and extinction of countless species due to nefarious undertakings such as industrial farming and hunting and poaching, to the indiscriminate slaughter of hundreds of millions of our own species from ethnic cleansing, genocide, murder, terrorism, and a myriad of other heinous actions which we have committed against humanity, against soldiers, civilians, and innocent men, women, children, and infants throughout history. It is no surprise why a plethora of us would hold a truculent and vitriolic attitude towards our own species. How can we commit such evil towards others when we have a moral consciousness that comes with an inherent imperative to protect life on this planet? However, I would like to challenge this narrative today. Not only have recent and past studies hypothesized that some, if not a myriad of animals have a consciousness, but it is also surmised that some animals have a sense of morality. This is defined by having awareness of external objects, self-awareness, and an ability to experience an array of moral emotions ranging from tolerance, compassion, empathy, and sympathy to negative emotions such as maleficent emotions of indignation, anger, malice, sadism, and hate that we as humans experience on a daily basis. Though many of these studies are often challenged within the scientific community as highly conjectural at best, it is hard to deny that there have been plenty of documented and recorded acts of animals that reflect moral capacity. Videos ranging from dogs showing signs of empathy towards their human companions and other animals, birds saving the lives of fish, elephants mourning their dead, and the loving and nurturing acts of primates and other animals who care for their different species as if they were their own. Not to mention a myriad of other examples of animal moral consciousness. However, I want to discuss the darker side of the spectrum of animal moral consciousness. I want to explore the actions of animals that reflect evil and villainy. With sparse examples of animals showing compassion, there are plenty more instances of animals committing acts of cruelty and malice. And I'm not talking about acts of nature which is done out of instinctual design or out of survival, but acts of unnecessary cruelty which is not done for the purpose of survival. Acts such as mass murder, vengeance, indiscriminate slaughter, culling, homicide, and other hate-fueled actions have all been observed in animals throughout history, with specific accounts baffling plenty zoologists and ethologists in the scientific community. The phenomenon is called surplus killing or henhouse syndrome. It is defined as a behavior exhibited by predators in which they cull an excessive amount of prey, more than necessary to eat for survival. They often abandon the excess which have been killed, indicating that the ample killings were unnecessary. Plenty of species have been observed to engage in surplus killing, from mammals such as canids, felines, and dolphins, to insects and even zooplankton. Some of these animals kill because they were forced into survival situations, some kill in excess as an act of unbridled warfare, some to send a grisly and stark message to rivaling predators, and for many species simply they kill for sport and for simply the pleasure of it. I would like to take a closer look at the most egregious accounts of surplus killing and genocide documented in the animal kingdom and discuss how they came about. So without further ado, let's begin. The Gombe chimpanzee war is perhaps the most well-known instance of genocide committed by a species other than humans, and is easily the most complex case of animal warfare that has ever been observed. To provide some background, the Gombe chimpanzee war, the 4-year primates war, was a conflict between two indigenous tribes of chimpanzees in the Gombe National Park in the Kigoma region of Tanzania that has lasted between the years of 1974 and 1978. They were once a united community of chimpanzee who roamed the hills of the Kasakala region, one of the 3 regions in the central valley of the Kigoma. These valleys served as a geological barrier in which chimpanzees established territorial communities, similar to human borders. A primatologist by the name of Jane Goodall first observed this territorialism in 1974 after she began to research primate behavior at the newly established Gombe Extreme Research Center. taking advantage of the center's essential resources that provided her with the opportunity to closely and intimately examine primate behaviors for anthropological and zoological study. She first noted their territorial behaviors after closely observing their feeding situations, making the observation that their behaviors became steadily more aggressive when food was involved between the separate territories. Tensions between the groups would slowly increase, with chimpanzee males beginning to patrol their respective territorial borders, with occasional raids between rival communities as food became increasingly sparse. Violence in the beginning between the communities, while isolated, was rather cruel, with patrols actively targeting female and infant chimpanzees in raids as a quasi form of terrorism, avoiding male members of communities to avoid igniting a war. When encountered by any male members, the conflict was only relegated to noisy, trenchant shouting matches and aggressive expressions of body language as a display of force and dominance. For the time being, the war was a cold one. Neither communities wanted to draw first blood and turn the war hot. Just yet. Goodall noted that she did not foresee the lingering and unforeseen conflict that was going to take place over the next 4 years, but when beginning to closely examine the politics behind this war, only does it become clear why such a malefic conflict transpired between the chimpanzee communities in the first place. You see, there were two main subgroups of chimpanzees who established control over the Kasakala region. The dominant powers who maintained primary control over the southern region of the valley were deemed as the southern subgroup by Goodall, while the remaining community which resided in the northern parts of the valley were deemed as a northern subgroup, who were much more numerous in the membership. Hostilities only began to dramatically increase as the long-reigning alpha or leader of the southern tribe, Mike, became old and started to reach the end of his tenureship as leader. Leadership, just like in humans, being the ultimate deterrent in which prevent nations into devolving in anarchic warfare. A competent and strong leader is necessary in establishing order and peace not only between many tribes and nations throughout history, but in the animal kingdom as well, as is commonly observed in animals such as pack leaders for wolves and leaders of prides and lions as a couple of examples. However, as the alpha of the southern subgroup Mike passed away, it left a power vacuum which 14 males vied to fill. This vacancy only added more fuel to the already hostile situations between the communities, as the northern community also saw it as a perfect opportunity for the conquest within the southern group, beginning to splinter and fight amongst each other to determine who claimed the empty throne. Initially, while tensions increased, the southern groups, despite being larger in number, did not invade for the first 8 months after the death of Mike. Perhaps they were waiting for an opportune time to strike. No one knows for sure. But while the northerners initially avoided encroaching the southerners' territory, the southerners, who now have formed a separatist faction of 9 adults in the southern region who were dubbed as the Kahama clan after the death of their former leader, began organizing war parties led by brother duo Charlie and Hugh to invade the northern enemy territories, which were seen as a perspicuous displays of force in which Goodall described as fearless. But despite these increasingly frequent invasions and blatant casus belli for the northerners to attack and retaliate, who are now deemed as the Kasakala community, as the southerners were now deemed as the Kahama, there were still forms of peaceful contact between the two communities, with 2 older males named Mike and Rudolph from the Kasakala and a Kahama male named Goliath serving as ambassadors and emissaries for their respective communities. 2 years after the passing of Mike, the tensions between the two became palpable, to the point where a serrated edge could cut through it. After the Kahama had given up their northernmost border areas to Kasakala over the years, the tensions reached its climax and first blood was drawn on January 7, 1974, where a war band consisting of 6 Kasakala males named Humphrey, Figgin, Jomio, Sherry, Everett, and Rudolph ambushed a Kahama male named Godi, who became isolated from his tribe after leaving his territory to eat fruit from a tree. The northerners slowly and stealthily approached Godi, initially unaware of the foreboding presence of the rivaling tribesmen until it was too late. As trepidation set in, Godi attempted to flee for his life, but the vain attempt was all for naught. One chimp grasped Godi's legs and threw him on the ground. The 5 other chimps all then surrounded the frightened and despondent Godi and began gnawing, beating, and stomping on Godi for 10 minutes straight as a hail of attacks viciously rained upon him. After 10 minutes had passed, Kasakala warband had fled as Godi became unresponded, slowly succumbing to his injuries. The boisterous chimps of the Kasakala warband all celebrated in vainglorious fashion over their vicious, brutal attack and demise of the chimp from the rivaling clan. The war had now become hot. Over the next 4 years, the Kasakala tribe would commit acts of unbridled violence and atrocities only humans were thought capable of, as members of the Kahama tribe were picked off in similar fashion. Day, another member of the Kahama, was brutally beaten to death for 20 minutes straight by 3 males, similarly left for dead like Godi had been, and the third being the elderly Goliath, who was previously mentioned as the ambassador for peaceful relations between the tribes back in the peaceful days of the clans. His kindness, unfortunately, was no longer reciprocated, as Kasakala patrol members consisting of chimps named Figgin, Fabian, Humphrey, Jomio, and the appropriately named Satan all ambushed him and viciously maimed and mutilated the poor elderly chimp with such acrimonious vitriol it even horrified the researcher who was observing the attack. One of the chimp's Fabian slowly twisted and discontorted Goliath's leg as if he was trying to dismember it. Then, after Goliath fell, another chimp from the Kahama, Hugh, also went missing, most likely being dispatched in a similar fashion like his other fallen tribesmen. This left only 3 Kahama males, Charlie, Sniff, and Willie Wally, who was already crippled with polio, but the Kasakala showed no mercy. Charlie, one of the aforementioned leaders of the Kasakala, was the next victim when the members of the Kasakala set their baleful gaze upon him. The attack was reported by a nearby fisherman who reported the noises of fierce conflict. After the dust settled, the corpse of Charlie was discovered by the researchers with injuries described only as terrible at the Kahama stream. The next who fell victim were the Kahama females, where the elderly Kahama female Madam B fell victim to Kasakala's vicious attacks, who slowly suffered as she succumbed to her wounds 4 days later. Then Willie Wally went missing in action, most likely felled by the Kasakala warband. Now only one Kahama chimp remained, the young adolescent chimp Sniff, who survived by himself for over a year as the sole survivor of the massacre. It had seemed the young chimp had attempted to wait out the hostile attitudes of the Kasakala, perhaps believing that the Kasakala would show mercy or an ounce of sympathy and maybe accept them into the tribe as their own. Unfortunately, for poor Sniff, this did not occur. Not even he could avoid the wrath of the Kasakala warband, as he eventually fell to the Kasakala as a final casualty of war. Of the females of the Kahama, 1 was killed, 2 went missing, and 3 were beaten and kidnapped. The Kasakala were thus victorious, finally conquering the remaining Kahama land, claiming over 15 square kilometers of new land. Though this victory did not last long, as the Kahama soon fell victim to another neighboring tribe named the Kalande, who Goodall had reason were plotting to invade since the Kahama only functioned as a buffer or neutral zone. This war was more akin to a slaughter rather than a back and forth war between the 2 tribes, and lifted the veil of ambiguity that surrounded the idea of animals purposely committing acts of cruelty. This war served as a basis of new research and shook the scientific community to its core, as these observations had proved that even animals such as chimpanzees are capable of warfare and even war crimes. The war was so similar in political and tactical theory to human warfare, it became a topic of study and to understand the anthropological similarities of humans and other primates. In psychology, there's a theory known as the contact hypothesis, which infers that 2 groups of equal status usually promotes tolerance and acceptance. It is a widely accepted model in human behavior, which was applied to this conflict as well. As soon as contact had ceased between the 2 chimpanzee groups and they became unequal in power, conflict ensued. No one really understands why the Kasakala tribe were initially peaceful for so long with the increasingly hostile Kahama tribe. Perhaps it was a deceitful veneer of meekness or cooperation to catch the Kahama off guard. This is an almost Sun Tzu level of strategy that has stunned researchers, as it is unheard of for animals to use deception at such an advanced degree. Goodall, after being shocked at the horrors which took place over the years and observing the conflict, had documented her findings and had chillingly stated, "For so many years I had believed that chimpanzees, while showing uncanny similarity to humans in many ways, were, by and large, rather nicer than us. Suddenly, I found that under certain circumstances, they could be just as brutal. They also had a darker side to their nature." She further expressed her feelings in her 1990 memoir, Through a Window, My 30 Years with the Chimpanzees of Gombe. She wrote, "For several years, I struggled to come to terms with this new knowledge. Often when I woke in the night, horrific pictures sprang unbent to my mind. Satan, one of the apes, cupping his hand below Sniff's chin to drink the blood that welled from a great wound on his face. Old Rudolph, usually so benign, standing upright to hurl a 4-pound rock at Godi's prostrate body. Jomio tearing a strip of skin from Day's thigh. Figgin charging and hitting again and again the stricken, quivering body of Goliath, one of his childhood heroes. While it is still in debate in the field of ethology whether the chimps had contemplated such acts of violence, with some even accusing her of excessive anthropomorphism, as her presence may have been a variable which influenced the violence between the tribes, it is now widely accepted that the chimpanzees are capable of waging wars similar to how humans do, and was also a reinforcing and compelling evidence for the killer ape theory, a theory which hypothesized that interpersonal aggression was a driving force for human evolution and the way we interact between one another during warfare. The reason I wanted to cover the Gombe chimpanzee war with such scrupulous detail is because it provides us with introspective insight in both chimpanzee and human nature. It also serves as an introductory basis to the unimaginable cruelties and capacity for violence that animals are capable of, giving us a clear lens of the extensive cruelty that animals are willing to go to. Tales of violence and similar and even greater levels that we will see in the subsequent instances of serial killings between animals in this video will only further provide us evidence of the capacity of cruelty within the animal kingdom, with the Gombe chimpanzee war serving as a clear backdrop and reminder that we are not unique when it comes to interspecies warfare and violence. The next interspecies conflict is perhaps less of a mass murder, but more so of a situation of survival and genocide perpetrated unfortunately by humans, who could also be seen as the animals in this situation for the unimaginable cruelty towards these creatures. This one is possibly the most disturbing in this video and incredibly saddening, so viewer discretion is advised. I want to go over possibly the most overlooked and forgotten genocide in history, and that is the Hayırsızada dog massacre, where on the Turkish island of Hayırsızada, or its more common name Sivriada, near Istanbul, was where the largest man-perpetrated genocide of animals in history took place. To provide some background, Turkey has always been a country with a very large population of urban stray and street dogs, where in the early years of the 20th century, an upward of over 100,000 stray dogs were present in the city of Istanbul alone. In the year of 1910, the city was expanding, and with its steady population growth, the ruling party at the time, the Committee of Union and Progress, could not ignore the ever-growing unaddressed issue of stray dogs roaming the city streets, some of which attacked domesticated pets and could be rabid and spread disease, and finding homes and building shelters for these dogs would be too costly for the city, or at least this was the rationale that they had used for their indescribable actions, which they would justify in the following year. To quell this issue, the mayor of Istanbul, then the Ottoman Empire, had rounded up 80,000 of these stray dogs, or about 80% of the street dog population of Istanbul, on boats and dumped them on a nearby island of Sivriada to cull a massive population of stray dogs which roamed the streets of Istanbul. This way the dogs could slowly starve to death without having to actively slaughter them and disposing of their corpses. When actively rounding up the dogs, they had forcibly put as many dogs as possible on the boats to transfer to the island. So a great many dogs fell overboard and drowned from the unauspicious and cramped conditions of the boat even before reaching the island. They were carelessly dumped off at the nearby island of Sivriada, only a few kilometers away. Some speculate that most dogs didn't even reach the island, with the majority possibly falling overboard. After the dogs were left to fend for themselves and starve to death on the tiny island of only 0.05 square kilometers, dogs had to resort to killing the smaller dogs first and eating each other for food to stave off starvation. When there were no smaller dogs left and no edible vegetation left to consume, some of the dogs in desperation even attempted to flee the island by trying to swim from ashore into the sea in a vain attempt. Unfortunately, every dog that attempted to swim had drowned shortly after. The remainder of the dogs began to slowly die off in pure distress. Emaciated, many dogs after days of no food were left with little to no energy, with no will or stamina to even move, awaiting their slow deaths as their beckoning howls go unheard. It was even reported that the ghastly howls of the poor pups were heard for weeks by passing ships and sailors, a truly horrific and depressing sound for anyone to hear. Soon there were no dogs left. 80,000 dogs culled in the span of a few weeks. In a short film which documents the massacre called Sesamuruzgada, when the Sultan believed that he had wiped away the biggest obstacle in the way of his own sultanate and modernization projects, he received the news of the killing of an Englishman at the Trophane Slope. The dogs, so the rumor said, attacked a drunken Englishman who threw at them stones. England, after receiving this news, instructed the Ottomans with an ultimatum to leave no single unattended dog on the streets. The Sheikh al-Islam, the highest religious authority in the Ottoman Empire, who did not approve the killing of dogs like the Janissaries since it would be a sin, said he saw no inconvenience in gathering the dogs and evacuating them to somewhere far away. The Sultan, after getting approval from the Sheikh al-Islam, chose the furthest and most desolate one of the Prince's Island as the destination of the exile. News of the incident had shortly reached the residents of the nearby city. Horrified and disgusted by the inhumane and evil actions the government had done to these street dogs, the city began to protest. Though the citizens of Istanbul protested the government's actions since they were considered wicked, the protest fell upon deaf ears, some even justifying the slaughter of the dogs by using Muhammad's massacres of dogs in Medina in the Hadith, as dogs were considered impure in Islam. Some historians believe this act of ruthless aggression against innocent animals had triggered the massive chain of events which had led to the downfall of the Ottoman Empire. Shortly after the incident, some citizens believed that the devastating earthquakes which had killed many civilians following the massacre of the dogs was a fell omen and was directly resulting from the massacre and was said to be a punishment by God for abandoning the dogs. Till this day, passing ships are said to still hear the haunting ghostly wails of the pups which were routinely massacred 100 years ago, and the island is now dubbed the inauspicious island for that reason. Unfortunately, even today, hundreds of thousands of street dogs and cats roam the streets of Turkey and are still dumped in densely closed off forested areas, despite ineffective spay-neuter laws recently passed. However, animal rights activists and animal parties in Turkey have made it a mission for the massacre to be recognized by the government, and the horrific events against the man's best friend 100 years ago shall never be forgotten. Now that I have covered one event which involves monkeys and one which involves dogs, let's cover the most recent animal massacre which involves both species of animal. And unfortunately, dogs are a victim once again. Sometime in late 2021, something strange had occurred in an Indian village of Lavul within the Beed district of Maharashtra. Horrific and almost seemingly fictitious reports started to arise from the village of something that would only be seen in a Planet of the Apes movie. It was reported that a local lager monkey started to abduct neighborhood puppies and dispatch them via chucking them off ledges of extreme heights, almost always killing the puppies while some were left at said heights with no means of getting down and succumbing to starvation. Almost around 250 of these puppies were reported to be murdered in a similar fashion in a span of only 3 months, which would mean this would not only be the largest surplus killing committed by monkeys, but the largest surplus killing ever observed by humans thus far. There is speculation on why these monkeys would go on a murderous rampage of tossing baby dogs off tall buildings and trees, but the main theory is that these killings are an act of vengeance. You see, the crazy part of this story is that these killings were all performed by only 2 monkeys in the village. Allegedly, these killings only began after infant monkeys were killed by stray dogs, leading the monkeys to commence an almost mafia-like vendetta of retaliation against the dogs of the village, culling and mass murdering their offspring in return. However, there is no proof that the monkeys' murder spree is an act of vengeance, but it is a compelling theory, as there would be no comprehensible reason for monkeys to ceaselessly murder so many puppies, and monkeys, or primates in general, have a known tendency to have a stubborn and tenacious attitude when it comes towards revenge. With many researchers and observations and anecdotes of people across the world which have observed vengeful and wrathful retaliatory behavior amongst monkeys and primates. More so, stray dogs have been known to attack passerbys in animal packs, so it is an inconceivable notion that stray dogs may have murdered one of these monkeys' offspring. The more sinister explanation could also be that these dogs were encroaching on these primates' territory and resources provided by surroundings and locals, but this is highly unlikely, as there are enough resources for both the local langur monkeys and village dogs. The potency of the violence had reached its apex when the raging monkeys started to target small human children en route to school, according to the local news. The locals had already failed to capture these rampaging monkeys, but these attacks that threatened their own community had gone too far, and they were finally capable of capturing the 2 serial killing monkeys by the local forest department. While it is disputed whether 250 monkeys were actually killed out of acts of revenge, as some official estimates state that the range is closer to 40, it cannot go unstated that these killings were akin to mass murder or serial killings of humans, and is another enigmatic case of surplus killings that puzzles zoologists and anthropologists alike. Further reinforces the notion that even animals are capable of unspeakable cruelty and murder void of the purpose of survival. Who truly knows how many of similar mass murders perpetrated by primates like these have occurred across the world and throughout history. Lastly, I would like to take a look at several isolated incidents of surplus killings observed in the animal kingdom that has garnered less zoological coverage than the former incidents and were perpetrated by several different species other than primates. One species which performed overkills, though rare, are wolves, with one being observed and photographed as recent as 2016, with this picture depicting 19 elk slain by a pack of wolves, left uneaten in Wyoming, stated to be a rare instance of surplus killing. This phenomenon has been observed and had written about as far back as 1974, with researchers stating it has only been observed twice in 30 years in wolf deer study and 3 times in wolf moose study in 40 years, and only occurring in winter months. Some other instances include 6 wolves killing 17 caribou in 1991 at Denali National Park, 2 wolves killing 40 deer in 2 weeks in Sweden in the year of 1976, and wolves killing 70 sheep in a farm north of McGall, Idaho in one night. While these killings are few and far in between, they have been important in wolf canine behavioral research. 2 main theories of why wolves kill so many without immediately consuming them are: 1, that since killing and the opportunity to eat is so rare, usually only occurring once in a few days, they instinctively kill in excess since there is such a high number of prey in a more vulnerable than usual predicament. So a natural behavior is to procure more resources available to you than is needed, sort of a case of eyes are bigger than your stomach. The second, of course, is for practice or sport, which is observed in many other species. So both theories could prove to be true. Another instance of canine onslaught was in Tasmania, where a dog killed 58 penguins in 1 week of 2018, and another penguin massacre in one particular incident in 1994, where a lone fox managed to infiltrate an island of 1,800 penguins on Granite Island in South Australia and massacred 74 penguins. Poor penguins, they simply can't catch a break from these ferocious canines. However, canids and primates aren't the only ones having all the fun. Felines are also massive surplus killers, with many such cases being recorded of felines killing in excess across the world, including leopards, who have over 50 recorded instances of surplus killings, where in one, a single leopard managed to kill 51 sheep and lamb in one hunting spree. Caracals were observed to kill 22 sheep one time in 1979, and lions are commonly known to hunt for sport in Africa, who hunt small birds and small game for fun, gazelles, rodents, and many other species. And one particularly grisly massacre involving humans, where in 1898 a village in Savo, Kenya was ravaged by a pair of young lions, killing 28 people in the span of 10 months, with estimates even ranging as many as 135 villagers. None of these humans, however, had been eaten. In fact, these humans were often dragged in the center of the village in a seemingly conscious and effective decision by lions to present freshly deceased villagers as a grisly reminder of who were truly the kings of the jungle, or, well, technically savannah, and might also be retaliatory of local hunters who may have hunted their family. But big cats don't exclusively kill and maim their smaller, more vulnerable prey. That's right, our own little ferocious feline companions exhibit the behavior of their much larger cousins at an alarmingly more common rate. It is pretty common knowledge, especially to many house cat owners, that our little furry companions like to put their carnivorous little sharp paws of death to use, commonly killing small rodents such as mice, rats, and birds for pure sadistic pleasure, and often revel in it, as a study shown that 1/3 of house cats kill on average twice a week, with nearly half being left to rot, with some estimates having a higher kill count for the domesticated serial killers. It might be wise to sleep with one eye open when you own one of these cute furry murderers, but humans have already shown that some of our own have a propensity to adore some of our own serial killers. Last, but certainly not least, I would like to give a dishonorable mention and nod to the biggest known jerks of the animal kingdom. That's right, the fin monstrosities known as dolphins, and not the team. These porpoise villains are also commonly known to be highly intelligent creatures and are capable of a myriad of human-like behavior, ranging from complex communication akin to language via echolocation, trickery, tasks, entertainment, and more. However, some dolphin entertainment are far more sinister than just bouncing a balloon on their snout. Dolphins have been known to be avid essayers of the sea and have a propensity for violence against other sea creatures and even their own. Dolphins have been observed to essay fish and dolphins to death, murder offspring to mate with their females again, and of course surplus kill plenty of fish in their own alike just simply for fun, with many dolphins washing up ashore with broken ribs, ruptured lungs, and other internal trauma, which showed that these fin divers are not to be messed with. There you have it. Several instances of animals committing mass murder and serial killings in the animal kingdom and in human society. While it is acknowledged that many species of animals commit acts of surplus killings for different reasons ranging from sport to revenge, it is still not known why many of these species' behaviors are so commonly exhibited by smaller species as well, such as zooplankton and ants, and many other insect species. Some researchers use these species as evidence that surplus killing has some sort of survival component or mechanism still unknown to us, as these species aren't capable of complex complex, self-aware, and conscious thought or behaviors, so therefore they cannot be held to the same moral judgment and standards as humans and be labeled as murderers. However, it cannot be denied as well that some of these cases of surplus killing were undoubtedly acts reinforced by complex behaviors, should give us further insight on complex and animal behaviors, and maybe even consider that animals are not so different from our own species, and that they may be as capable of evil action as we are, despite differences in intelligence. Should animals be held to the same moral standards as humans? Are these animals serial killers or simply survival mechanisms that we have yet to understand? And what animals did I miss? Let me know your guys' thoughts below, and thanks for watching till the end. Of course, Godspeed.